Hi everyone, this will be just a short little video to help people understand the very basics of a throwing motion. In many ways, throwing can be quite complex, but if we break it down into just a few phases, it doesn't have to be too complicated. So I've got on the screen here just some older video of Craig Kimbrell when he used to pitch for the Atlanta Braves. And I've got just on the right side a rear view and on the left side a front on view. And I've just got this video so I can break it down frame by frame for you. So just with the throwing motion, if we start with just the leg already lifted and we start to break it down, if we look at the first aspect of throwing, we can think about just the back leg, or the back leg phase. And if we look to the right of your screen, the rear view, we can see his hips start to go towards first base. So he's sticking his butt out, and it allows him to load that back leg as he's going towards home plate. So you'll see his knee doesn't bend a whole lot. It does bend, but it doesn't bend a huge amount compared to the amount of hip motion that's happening. And that's quite important just to keep him balanced so he doesn't fall one way or the other. He's got his weight in the middle of his back foot. If we go back and start again, if we look on the left side of the screen now, you'll see his hips, as they go towards home plate, they also go down towards the ground. So some people will call this riding the slide. So if I just add a little line here, so his hips don't go straight down, they don't go straight across, but they go down and forward. And that's important again to generate some good force out of the back leg, getting into the next phase. So if we get rid of that little red line, and we'll just come back a little bit. So the next phase you can call just a simple transition phase. So we're going from the back leg to the front leg. But a very important key part is what's happening with the hips and shoulders and trunk. So you'll see you still got the foot in the air. And if you look at his belt buckle on the left side of the screen, it's basically pointing towards us. And then very quickly, if you go frame by frame, as he's got his foot now firmly placed on the ground, the front foot, his belt buckle's pointing towards home plate or the catcher. But if you look, his shoulders, if we go back to kind of foot plant position, his shoulders on the left side of the screen are still pointed towards us. On the right side of the screen, they're still closed off. So if we let that twist around, he's got a lot more trunk rotation that needs to happen, but his hips are already pointed towards home plate. And you'll also see just on the left side of the screen, the side of his shirt. You can see how it's twisted. So that tells us we've got a lot of trunk rotation that's about to happen. And when we've got that good shoulder hip separation, that's what creates that good rotational power. So if we go on to the next phase that we just started, where he's got his front foot firmly on the ground, people will call this foot plant position. And it's just a couple of little keys that we can look at. And if we look at the front shin on the left side of the screen, you can see how it's angled back, it's not vertical. And if we now keep going a couple of frames, you'll see his knee's really solid. It doesn't continue to bend, which is key. It stays straight and then slightly straightens even further. So you'll see a lot of your elite guys will either stay really still with that front knee or they'll straighten it. So at ball release, it'll be pretty close to a fully straightened knee. And that often, but not always, is a good indication that we've created some good rotational power force that's gone up through the leg, into the trunk, into the arm for good velocity. So that should give you just a really good basic understanding of what's happening with the legs and the trunk. And if we go back to the start, we can just go through a basic little assessment or scenario of what's happening with the arm. The arm can be a bit more complicated, but we'll try and keep it pretty simple of what we want to look for in a basic scenario of throwing. And so we'll start to come down. We'll just add a vertical line in line with the pitching rubber. And as you'll see, as his hands separate, his hand never touches the line. So as his body goes forward, his hand's going forward with him and then gets into that good throwing position, which we'll get to in a second. So one thing you might see with a few people that struggle with a few shoulder issues and elbow issues or even velocity or command is as they separate, their hand has already come out and the hand is already behind the line quite a bit. And that can create a bit of a dragging issue and potentially mechanical issues down the track. So if we follow what Craig does, keep the hand a bit closer to the body as the body weight goes towards your throwing direction. So that's one simple key that's a good thing to try and keep in mind. The next one is we'll come back to about here, we'll clean off those markings. And there's two basic things that often people talk about, how the arm or the hand is directed before it gets to the acceleration phase of throwing. And one is elbow driven, one is hand driven. So Craig here is more of an elbow driven guy. So you'll see his elbow of his throwing hand starts to bend quite a bit. And his hand comes up in a kind of upward straight line through there. So that's kind of hand driven. So we go back and look. So that's elbow driven. So you can look at his elbow bends quite a bit. You can look at the right side of the screen. It's got a good amount of elbow bend. And his elbow gets quite high. So he's one of the more extreme versions of the elbow driven arm path. And so we'll go back. So there's a few players, but not as many in the majors. One is Justin Verlander. He's a bit more what you call hand driven. So as he goes forward, if this was Justin, you'll see his hand go this way. So a bit more of a circle path. There'll be less elbow bend. So in the end, they still get to the same position. It's two different ways. Often a lot of players will be somewhere in between, but that gives you just a rough idea of what can go on. The reasons behind both we can go through in a later date or in a later video. But both bring us to the next key position that we just want to be aware of for your basic throwers is that foot plant position. So that front foot is firmly on the ground now. And if we look up, the elbow is basically at shoulder height and the hand is right on top of the elbow. So the elbow is at about 90 degrees and the hand, I'll just clear the markings out, the hand is basically pointed towards us, which is quite helpful. So as we now start to really accelerate the throwing motion with the arm, it's in a pretty good position. So if we see at foot plant, so where the foot's firm, but the hand is kind of in this position now, we call that a bit of a late arm position. Sometimes it's a bit early like this, but not as much. So generally if we're somewhere around that position, that good L shape, we're in pretty good shape as far as what that arm is about to do. So that should give you a good basic idea of what a standard throwing motion should look like. There's plenty of different varieties, but when we break it down into the key fundamental positions, most of your top elite throwers will be somewhere close to those positions. Just for some people that are left-handed, this might help. I'll just flick Craig around to being left-handed, and so you can just have a look to see how that goes. So we'll fast forward. So the leg lift. So you'll see now hips going forward and down towards home plate. Arms staying close to the body. Going more into the transition where the hips start to turn really fast and late just before he puts his foot down. Now the arms in a good position, hands pointed towards us, elbows bent. And now that front knee stays solid, starts to straighten and releases the ball. There we go. So that should give you a good idea of just the very basics of throwing motion, what generally happens or what should be happening. And that should put us in line for good velocity, good control, and a good chance of not having too many arm issues. If you have any further questions, feel free to visit our website at rotationalpowerperformance.com or shoot us an email at info@rotationalpowerperformance.com. Thank you.